Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Of the 3 devas, 1 had been killed, 1 was crippled, and 1 fled. All cultivators from all 4 sects were completely stunned, their minds having been battered by tsunami after tsunami of shock. As for the cultivators from the 3 allied sects, they were trembling in despair, especially those from the Dao River court. Because Patriarch Starry River hadn't been killed, the cultivators from his court had it a bit better off. However, a single statement from Bai Xiaochun had sent their patriarch fleeing with no concern for anyone else. The sight of him holding nothing back to escape within 3 breaths of time filled the disciples from his sect with utter hopelessness. Worst off were the cultivators from the Polarity River court. Their patriarch was dead, which meant that the Polarity River court was destined to fall. In fact, they would likely not even qualify to remain in the Middle Reaches cultivation world. Those disciples were in complete despair, their eyes bloodshot, and yet strangely, they didn't hate the river-defying sect. After all, they were the invaders, and although they were shocked and even terrified by Bai Xiaochun's level of strength, they couldn't possibly dare to hate him. They hated the Starry River court. Patriarch Polarity River's dying breath had been a curse upon Patriarch Starry River, and that was what kindled the hatred in the hearts of the cultivators from the Polarity River court. However, now was not the time to try to wipe out the Starry River court. The Polarity River court had no heart to continue fighting, and instead, began to flee. The Starry River court and Dao River court cultivators were also sapped of their will to fight, and their hearts were seized with alarm and terror. The patriarchs of all the sects had been routed, and the sects themselves were in imminent danger of collapse. Therefore, they could only think of one thing to do: flee. The 3 sects were like mountains collapsing into rubble. None of them dared to unleash a single attack as they went. They just ran. Song Junwan looked over at Bai Xiaochun in his radiance. The sight of him cutting down devas with impunity and dominating all creation left her feeling more than a bit dazed. He seemed to be growing powerful so quickly that he would soon leave her far behind. Master Limitless had similarly mixed emotions in his eyes as he recalled past scenes from the Bloodstream sect. Next to him, the weak and injured Shui Mei reacted in the same way. In recent years, she had often thought back to the misunderstandings of past years and sighed emotionally. The Bloodstream division was completely shaken, and yet, even more shaken was the Spirit Stream division. Many elders and disciples were familiar with Bai Xiaochun, and yet, he had grown to a level that filled their hearts with astonishment. That was especially true of the disciples who were followers of Li Qinghao. Shangguan Tianyu bowed his head, bitterness gnawing at his heart. Beihan Lai stood there silently, filled with complicated emotions. In the sect headquarters, the rabbit, the monkey, and the other powerful experts all reacted with zeal and excitement. That was especially true of sect leader Zheng Yuandong, who was so excited he could hardly control himself. Cheering soon broke out, and then, the cultivators looked around at the fleeing enemies from the other 3 sects. At this point, the sect elders began to shout loudly, "Kill them all!" The river-defying sect disciples zealously shouted battle cries as they poured out of their headquarters in pursuit. The Spirit Stream Division's spell formation giants formed up again, hundreds of them, lunging forward with great swords in hand, unleashing magical items to strike at the Starry River court. The injured Heavenhorn Ink Dragon roared and began to thrash into the enemy with deadly force. The Bloodstream division reacted similarly. Patriarch Bloodstream took the lead, followed by Song Junwan with her blood sword, as well as Master Limitless and the other leaders. They held nothing back to attack the Dao River court. Bruiser let out a howl, galvanizing the spirit beasts, animated corpses and gargoyles. Along with the Profound and Pillstream divisions, they attacked the army from the Polarity River court. The river-defying sect had quashed their despair, and were unleashing their might onto the enemy. Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief. The burden he had shouldered in this battle had been beyond heavy. The slightest mistake, the tiniest slip-up, could have led to the gravest of situations. After all, the 3 sects' forces still numbered roughly 100,000, whereas the river-defying sect had been cut down to only about 20,000. The slightest misstep could have led to the river-defying sect truly being wiped out. It didn't matter how amazing Bai Xiaochun's battle prowess was, he couldn't single-handedly fight an army of 100,000. That was why he had taken such a big risk to deal with all 3 devas at the same time, and was also the reason why he was currently so exhausted. Another reason why he had been able to eke out a victory was that the 3 diva patriarchs all came from different sects, and had fundamental differences and disagreements. Any one of them could turn on any of the others at any time. With a relationship like that, it was easy to cooperate when the going was good. But when adversity struck, they could easily split apart. Had the three of them cooperated fully, without any hesitation, then although they might not have been able to kill Bai Xiaochun, they would definitely have been able to grievously wound him, and most likely destroy the river-defying sect in the end. If the Wildlands' 4 heavenly kings and Grand Heaven Master had been reduced to the early mortal Dao Diva realm, and then fought Bai Xiaochun, things would have been very different. Considering how well they cooperated and strategized, even if Bai Xiaochun had fought to the death with every trick in his book, they still would have come out alive. It would have been nothing like what had happened here, with one diva being killed and 2 injured, and their fighting forces left completely demoralized. When Bai Xiaochun considered all of these things, he suddenly realized he had come out quite lucky. Eyes flashing, he strode toward the fighting. Him joining the fight demoralized the 3 great sects even more. They had been trying to fight back earlier, but now, they simply dropped their weapons and fled with all the power they could muster. The entire battlefield was a scene of chaos. The cultivators of the 3 sects had few routes of escape, and the river-defying sect cultivators were cooperating well under the leadership of their elders, and were striking with deadly force. Bai Xiaochun focused on the 3 sects' nascent soul cultivators. He shook the battlefield wherever he went, saving everyone he could, but specifically looking for Li Qinghao and Hu Xiaomei. However, the field of battle was large, and in complete disorder. The fact that he couldn't find them caused unease to rise up in his heart, but around then, Bruiser came bounding over. He had shrunk down to normal size, and excitedly thumped his head into Bai Xiaochun's leg. Bai Xiaochun smiled as he rubbed Bruiser's head. He had missed him terribly, and when he saw the scars and wounds criss-crossing him, anger began to burn in his eyes. "Who dared to injure my Bruiser?" he said through gritted teeth. "This will not go unanswered." With that, he reached out to touch the particularly eye-catching scar on Bruiser's neck. "Over the next few days, Bruiser, we'll go find all the people who gave you these scars, and they'll have to answer to me." Bruiser let out a long howl in response. However, the fact that Bai Xiaochun had touched the scar on his neck reminded him of something, and suddenly his eyes flickered darkly with grief. Bai Xiaochun noticed the change in his expression, and his eyes widened. He knew Bruiser well, and was aware of the speed he was capable of. Even the devas of the 3 great sects should not have been able to wound him unless there was some sort of ambush involved. Therefore, the only other explanation for how he could have been wounded in such a way was if he was in the middle of saving someone. Based on the state of the scar, it must have happened months ago. Under what circumstances could Bruiser have been so anxious that he failed to defend himself? In what situation would he have chosen not to flee to safety, and ended up surrounded? With such thoughts on his mind, Bai Xiaochun began to pant. Eyes widening, his uneasy feeling from before suddenly grew more intense. "Bruiser, where is Uncle Li? And Hu Xiaomei? Where are they?" In response to Bai Xiaochun's question, more grief filled Bruiser's eyes. He couldn't hide anything from Bai Xiaochun, and in fact, didn't even have the desire to. All he did was let out a few braying sounds. The sadness in his voice made Bai Xiaochun's heart feel like it was being torn apart. The world suddenly grew dark, as though it had become stained with blood. "You don't know where Hu Xiaomei is. But Uncle Li was captured?" Bai Xiaochun's expression twisted with rage, not toward Bruiser, but simply pure anger birthed from anxiety and madness. Seeing Bai Xiaochun like this caused Bruiser to emit a few more yipping sounds. Bai Xiaochun was shaking visibly. Bruiser was no cultivator, and although he was a beast king with extraordinary intelligence, it was difficult for him to express himself clearly in certain matters. Ignoring the surrounding disciples of the 3 sects, Bai Xiaochun sent his divine sense spreading out in all directions. Heaven and earth rumbled as he scoured everything in a 500-kilometer area. It only took a moment for him to have the entire locale under his command. His current goal was to find Zheng Yuandong or other patriarchs of the river-defying sect, and get all of the details about Uncle Li. As his divine sense spread out, all cultivators, both those of the 3 sects and those of the river-defying sect, suddenly felt immense pressure weighing down on them. At the same time, a windstorm sprang up around Bai Xiaochun. In that same moment, a middle-aged woman appeared off in the distance in the sect headquarters. Her face was pale from serious injury, and she appeared to have just awoken from a coma. She seemed so weak that a breeze might carry her away, and could only walk by being supported on either side by younger female disciples. Her gaze quickly came to rest on Bai Xiaochun, and a gleam of excitement appeared in her eyes. At the same time, she seemed deeply anxious. Without the slightest hesitation, she raised her voice and cried out, "Xiaochun, hurry up and save your Uncle Li." The instant Bai Xiaochun heard her voice, he jerked his head to look in her direction. He instantly recognized her. She was none other than the former Peak Lord of Violet Cauldron Peak, the master of Big Fatty Zhang, and the woman who had fallen in love with his Uncle Li. She was Shu Meixiang. "Aunt Shu," he cried. Trembling visibly, he vanished, to reappear a moment later in front of her. Reaching out, he sent gentle energy streaming into her body, which caused the color to return to her face. However, she still seemed as fragile as before, and her voice was hoarse and scratchy as she went on to provide further explanation. "Get to the Dao River Court. Your Uncle Li was taken captive by the Patriarch from there, about half a year ago." Shu Meixiang's sudden outburst caused her injuries to flare up. Blood sprayed out of her mouth, and if it weren't for the fact that she was being bolstered by Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base power, she would have perished instantly. Her words struck Bai Xiaochun like a lightning bolt, causing him to shake violently where he stood. About this time, the patriarchs of the river-defying sect, as well as Zheng Yuandong and some other important people, could sense the violent outburst brewing in Bai Xiaochun. Furthermore, Shu Meixiang's words woke them all from the delighted happiness they had been reveling in moments ago because of the sect being saved. It wasn't that they had intended to hide things from Bai Xiaochun, it was just that everything had occurred too quickly. He showed up out of the blue, devastated 3 devas, crushed the morale of the 3 sects, and then sent the river-defying sect cultivators onto the counterattack. Many people were in a daze from everything that was occurring, and just hadn't yet thought to inform Bai Xiaochun of certain matters. Patriarch Spirit Stream hurried over to provide a more thorough explanation. The true reason everything had happened actually didn't have anything to do with Li Qinghao. After all, Li Qinghao was only in the nascent soul stage. Despite how incredibly talented he wasn't so outstanding that a diva patriarch would attack him. The reason for everything was Bruiser. The patriarch from the Dao River Court, the very one who had experienced fleshly body destruction and now existed as a nascent divinity, had coveted Bruiser for some time. However, Bruiser was always very careful, and normally never left the sect. Because of that, the diva patriarch had never had a chance to act on his desires. However, half a year ago, that patriarch had set up an elaborate trap to kidnap Li Qinghao and use him to get to Bruiser. The reason he had targeted Li Qinghao was obvious. It all had to do with the relationship between Bai Xiaochun and Bruiser. The fact that Li Qinghao was like family to Bai Xiaochun and Bruiser was no secret. And thus, he was the perfect person to use to lure out Bruiser. And that was exactly what had happened. Bruiser put everything on the line to try to save Li Qinghao, and had come out of the affair with an ugly scar on his neck. In the end, the river-defying sect's patriarchs had interfered, along with the reserve powers of the sect, including the Blood Ancestor. In the end, the Dao River Court's ambush was foiled, and Bruiser was saved. Unfortunately, Li Qinghao was taken away. Even now, they weren't sure if he was alive or not. The reason they couldn't tell if he was alive or dead had to do with the special technique he cultivated. He drew his existence from plants and vegetation, and had been studying a way to reconverge his life force. Because of that, he had no life slip in the sect. That made it impossible to determine his current state. Patriarch Spirit Stream, Zhao Yuandong, and the others used the fastest means possible to impart all of this information to Bai Xiaochun. In the end, his mind crashed as if with thunder, and his heart burned with raging killing intent. Arggghhhhhh. He howled, causing the sky to vibrate and the lands to tremble. Eyes crimson, he didn't bother to offer any explanation. He simply turned, and began to fly at top speed toward the Dao River Court. Feeling suicidal, Dao River Court. "I'm gonna kill you, Patriarch Dao River." The insane killing intent that raged in his heart and mind was the likes that rarely appeared in him. In fact, it had only been seen once before in his life, when his apprentice went missing in the wildlands. This was the second time. However, this time was actually worse than when Bai Hao had gone missing. Bai Xiaochun almost seemed like a different person, a person who had descended into pure madness. There was no other reaction he could have. After all, this was Li Qinghao. His uncle Li had brought him from Mount Hood to practice immortal cultivation, and had even taught him the fundamentals. He had passed his magics of plants and vegetation on to Bai Xiaochun, and had sheltered him from one disaster after another related to pill concocting. The truth was that they had a relationship like that of a son and a father. Not even Bai Xiaochun was exactly sure when it was that he had come to view Uncle Li as family. There were many people he cared about in the river-defying sect, but there was only one who he viewed like a blood relative. Li Qinghao. Therefore, how could Bai Xiaochun possibly not go mad? His thunderous roar filled the air as he shot off into the distance, followed by Bruiser. As for Patriarch Spirit Stream and the other leaders, they were shaken by his shout. However, the Patriarchs quickly issued orders for a squad of roughly 1,000 river-defying sect disciples to follow along as emergency backup. As far as Patriarch Spirit Stream was concerned, it didn't matter how powerful the reserve powers and spell formation of the Dao River Court was, they probably couldn't handle Bai Xiaochun's towering cultivation base. However, as a member of the older generation, Patriarch Spirit Stream still had to look out for him. More than 1,000 disciples immediately flew after Bai Xiaochun. Of course, they weren't a match for him in speed, so Patriarch Spirit Stream gave them airships to use, which whistled through the air at top speed toward the Dao River Court. And yet, Bai Xiaochun was still the fastest. He drew deeply on his cultivation base, as well as his fleshly body power. He even used the Undying Hex to teleport rapidly through the air. At his current speed, it would only require the time it takes an incense stick to burn for him to reach his destination. Bai Xiaochun's mind was almost a complete blank. He didn't dare to descend into reminiscence. Instead, he focused on one thing. Uncle Li, you have to be alive. Anxiety gripped his heart, profound nervousness generated, not from fear for himself, but from the possibility that he might hear news that could crush him. Mental pressure began to mount, and his cultivation base was going crazy. All of the anxiety and madness swirled together, making a cyclone that dimmed heaven and earth. Bai Xiaochun moved so fast that not even Bruiser could keep up. He shot through the air alone, leaving thunderous sonic booms behind him as he went. Rumble. The massive sound caused by his passage attracted the attention of local cultivator clans, small-scale sects, and city after city. Everyone looked up in shock, and yet, they couldn't see Bai Xiaochun. They only saw a long wound-like streak appear above them in the sky. Countless gasps and exclamations of shock filled the air. What was that sound? The sky is being ripped open? From a distance, the streak he left behind really did look like a rift opening up in the sky. Time ticked by. In the end, it took less time than an incense stick takes to burn. In his rage and anxiety, Bai Xiaochun appeared, in the mountains containing the Dao River Court. The sect headquarters was made of 7 mountain peaks, each one a different color. Because the routing of the 3 sects back on the battlefield had happened so quickly, the Dao River Court in general wasn't fully aware of what had happened. In fact, most of them didn't even know that their patriarch had lost his fleshly body. Only a few people had been informed, who then ordered that the sect's grand spell formation be activated. Therefore, when Bai Xiaochun arrived, he saw a glittering light shield surrounding the sect, preventing anyone from entering. It was a powerful shield which radiated intense pressure. After all, it was the grand spell formation of the number 1 sect in the Middle Reaches cultivation world of the Eastern Heavenspan River. But no matter how powerful that spell formation was, it couldn't compare to the spell formation that had protected the former Great Wall. Bai Xiaochun's Undying Hex had been able to pierce through that spell formation, and therefore, this trifling formation belonging to a Middle Reaches sect couldn't possibly do anything to him, not even if it had been created by a diva. Bai Xiaochun didn't slow down for even a moment. In fact, he sped up. Rumbling sounds filled the air as he bore down on the Dao River Court, which currently housed several tens of thousands of cultivators who hadn't been mobilized during the war. That group included 3 nascent soul experts and many in the core formation stage. When they saw something streaking toward them through the sky, their eyes went wide. What's that? The sky is being ripped open? But how? What's going on? That rift is actually heading right toward us. No one in the group, not even the nascent soul experts, were able to see Bai Xiaochun. He was moving too quickly. The only thing they could see was that rift being slashed open in the sky. Even as they began to cry out in alarm, the rift reached the grand spell formation. And yet, bizarrely, the spell formation didn't react at all. There wasn't even the slightest ripple. Bai Xiaochun pierced right through it. That was the power of the Undying Hex. As soon as he was inside the Dao River Court, he slammed into one of the mountains, causing the sky to tremble and the land to vibrate. Rrrruumble. The mountain immediately began to crumble, with countless bits of rock and rubble showering down. Tens of thousands of cultivators dashed out of the way, crying out in alarm. Only at this point did the figure which had previously been impossible to see suddenly become clear in midair above the crumbling mountain. Even as he hovered there, terrifying fluctuations rolled out, as well as a massive vortex which seemed capable of destroying the world. The disciples of the Dao River Court gasped and trembled. Even the nascent soul cultivators were shaking in nervousness. However, this was their sect headquarters, so no matter how scared they were, they had to brace themselves and attack. Instantly, countless beams of light that represented magical techniques began to slash through the air toward Bai Xiaochun. At the same time, deadly beams of light shot from the other mountain peaks in his direction. "Get the hell out of my way!" Bai Xiaochun roared, waving his hands out in front of him. A blast of wind spread out in all directions, slamming into the beams of light and magical techniques. All of them were crushed as easily as dried weeds, and yet, the blast of wind didn't stop. The sect headquarters trembled, and blood sprayed out of the mouths of countless disciples. Screams echoed out as they fell back, and yet, before they could get anywhere, Bai Xiaochun's divine sense shot out. In the blink of an eye, it filled the entire Dao River court. Not even restricted areas and places locked down by spell formations were able to remain hidden. It was at this point that, deep underground beneath the Dao River court, he found Li Qinghao's aura. There, in a dank dungeon beneath the sect, were numerous prisoners, one of whom was the unconscious Li Qinghao, who appeared to be gasping on the verge of death. When Bai Xiaochun saw that Li Qinghao was still alive, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, it was then that he realized what bad shape Li Qinghao was in, and his rage mounted. Without the slightest hesitation, he blurred into motion, unleashing a fist strike directly at the ground. Crevices snaked out as the earth was ripped open. Numerous Dao River court disciples were sent tumbling away from the force of the blow, their minds reeling and their hearts shivering in shock. "Who is that?" "That's Bai Xiaochun. He's the one who beat the 3 devas. He killed one, devastated the other, and sent the third running away. Damn it, what is he doing here?" Bai Xiaochun had already destroyed one of the 7 mountains that comprised the sect headquarters. Now, his blow caused a second mountain to be ripped up and transformed into rubble. At this point, Bai Xiaochun realized that one of the strange features of the Dao River Court's headquarters was its unusually thick ground. The 7 mountain peaks of the sect were all connected at the base, which meant that to get to the underground area, all of the mountains had to be destroyed. Bai Xiaochun was in no mood to go about it one at a time. Rapidly performing an incantation gesture, he let out a shout, utilizing the living mountain incantation to cause countless rocks in the area to rush toward him and transform him into a gigantic stone golem. That stone golem's face looked exactly like Bai Xiaochun's. Without the slightest hesitation, he unleashed a second fist strike, which shattered more of the lands below. At the same time, 2 of the remaining 5 mountains began to collapse. Cries of alarm and terror filled the air as countless disciples fled in terror, unwilling to stay behind in their own sect headquarters. As they fled, Bai Xiaochun let out a shout that caused the sky to distort. A third fist strike landed like a meteor falling from the heavens. Boom! The remaining 3 mountain peaks collapsed amidst deafening rumbling sounds. The Dao River Court had been reduced to rubble. From the time Bai Xiaochun arrived until the deed was done, not even 60 breaths of time had passed. As of this moment, the only thing that remained in the ground was a massive crater. At the bottom of that crater was the Dao River Court's dungeon. Without pausing for a moment, Bai Xiaochun blurred into motion, vanished, and then reappeared outside of Li Qinghao's cell. The intense noise from moments ago caused Li Qinghao's eyes to flutter open. His aura was profoundly weak as he looked over at Bai Xiaochun. When he saw who it was, his eyes widened. "Xiaochun?" It was with uncertainty and open confusion that Li Qinghao said Xiaochun. At the moment, he wasn't sure whether or not he was dreaming. After being taken captive to the Dao River Court, he hadn't been tortured but rather been left to wallow in misery. Although he didn't care too much about whether he himself lived or died, he hated the idea of himself being used as a trap to lure out Bruiser. In the end, he had been powerless to change the outcome. He hadn't even been able to kill himself. He could only watch as Bruiser was ambushed. Afterward, his guilt began to consume him. Thankfully, during the half-year which had passed, Patriarch Dao River had never succeeded in getting his hands on Bruiser. However, the sword wound which had been inflicted on Bruiser's neck was something that Li Qinghao blamed himself for constantly. At the same time, his hatred of the Dao River Court grew more intense. Although he had become nothing but a worthless prisoner rotting away in a dungeon, his hatred kept him going. As long as the Dao River Court stood, he could not allow himself to die. He had gritted his teeth and endured the strange powers of the dungeon, which sucked away at his cultivation base and life force. He had grown weaker and weaker, and yet continued to hang on. Thankfully, he cultivated a special technique based on the power of plants and vegetation, which offered him special protection. In this most critical of times, his complete focus kept him going, as did his hatred of the Dao River Court. And Bai Xiaochun. He had often thought about that young boy he had picked up from that mountain all those years ago. Although Bai Xiaochun had been gone for a long time, he wanted to see him again. He wanted to protect him. He was worried that, unless he was there to look out for him, the boy would cause disasters the likes of which could never be resolved. That became part of his focus, and therefore, despite the pain he faced, he endured. Now, when he heard deafening booming sounds outside, he opened his eyes, and wondered if he was seeing things when he saw Bai Xiaochun right there in front of him. As for Bai Xiaochun, when he heard Xiaochun, a tremor ran through him, and tears welled up in his eyes. Li Qinghao's voice was weak, but filled with a warmth and kindness that caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to leap in his chest. "Uncle Li," he said, tears flowing down his cheeks. Although he had battle prowess that could crush devas, as well as the highest of statuses when he was with Li Qinghao, he became the same Bai Xiaochun he had been back on Mount Hood, so afraid of lightning that he had lit a stick of incense 13 times. He reached forward and pulled Li Qinghao into an embrace. Weeping, he sent cultivation base power pouring into him, healing some of his injuries. At the same time, he realized how weak Li Qinghao had become, and his tears flowed even harder. There were white hairs on Li Qinghao's head now, and he had wrinkles on his face, making him look middle-aged. Obviously, the half-year of confinement had taken its toll. He no longer looked like Bai Xiaochun remembered him, elegant and refined, a legacy echelon cultivator, the proud and unyielding peak lord of fragrant Cloud Peak. Li Qinghao was still a bit confused as he pulled back and looked at Bai Xiaochun. Ignoring his own weakness and injury, he reached out and gently put his hand onto Bai Xiaochun's cheek. "Is it really you? You've grown up, kid. All right, no crying now." He wiped the tears off of Bai Xiaochun's face, fully convinced that this was the same young boy he had brought back to the sect from Mount Hood. "It's me, Uncle Li. I'm back." Bai Xiaochun dried his eyes and helped Li Qinghao to his feet. Thanks to Bai Xiaochun's help, Li Qinghao was already getting back some energy. He grinned. "As long as you're back, that's all that matters." Within his smile was approval, happiness, and kindness. He was a nascent soul cultivator, so despite the emotions which surged inside of him, he kept himself in control, and simply smiled at Bai Xiaochun. Before he had a chance to ask Bai Xiaochun any questions about what he had been up to all these years, he looked out at the crater which surrounded them. With Bai Xiaochun's help, they climbed out. Whereupon Li Qinghao saw the crumbled ruins of the 7 mountain peaks that made up the former Dao River Court, and the terrified Dao River Court disciples who were still fleeing off into the distance. At that point, Li Qinghao couldn't contain his excitement. Continuing to peer around, he said, "Did one of the patriarchs finally break through? Where is he?" His first reaction was to assume that one of the patriarchs had finally reached the Diva realm and come to break him out of the Dao River Court's dungeon. And yet, he immediately hesitated. After all, even after making a breakthrough, a single patriarch shouldn't have been able to reduce the Dao River Court to this condition. At that point, he started to wonder if 2 patriarchs had broken through to become devas. However, that seemed even less likely than his original guess. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times, then cleared his throat. Uncle Li, none of the patriarchs broke through. Nobody else is here, except for us 2. Now that he had rescued Li Qinghao, his stress was fading away, and his personality was going back to normal. As such, he held back from sounding a bit pleased with himself. Li Qinghao's jaw dropped. He looked around at the ruins, and then back at Bai Xiaochun, and suddenly laughed loud and clear. Slapping him on the shoulder, he said, "Good. Great. Excellent." He didn't ask any details. He didn't need to. The excitement he felt in his heart was all he needed. The child that he had brought to the sect from Mount Hood had grown up into a shocking figure. The only disappointment he felt was that the fledgling had left the nest to fly in the endless sky, and that he no longer needed someone else around to take care of him. It was a feeling of both happiness and disappointment mixed together. Li Qinghao's reaction got Bai Xiaochun even more excited. Feeling very pleased with himself, he swished his sleeve and said, "This is nothing, Uncle Li. You have no idea how awesome I was back in the wildlands." Before he could continue, a whistling sound filled the sky, which was Bruiser, who had only just caught up. As soon as he arrived, he saw the ruins of the Dao River Court, and Li Qinghao. He didn't seem surprised at all that Bai Xiaochun could destroy the entire Dao River Court. He excitedly shrank back down to normal size, rushed over to Li Qinghao, and began to rub him with his head. Li Qinghao's heart swelled with both warmth and remorse. Softly stroking Bruiser's head, he looked at the scars covering him, and sighed. "I'd always hoped I would be able to help you get your revenge, Bruiser, but I guess I don't need to now. Your dad's already helped you." Chuckling, Li Qinghao looked around at the ruins, and then back at Bai Xiaochun, his heart bursting with pride. "Let's go, Xiaochun. The Dow River Court might be able to survive this somehow, but it will take them a long time to recover. If they ever do, calm down, Uncle Li, there's more to do. After measuring up the scene around them, Bai Xiaochun turned to Bruiser. Bruiser, there were a bunch of other disciples following us, right? What's the delay? Why don't you go back and lead them here? Bruiser wasn't quite sure what he had in mind, but never refused to do what Bai Xiaochun asked him to do. He shot off, then returned a moment later with more than 1,000 airships following him. The cultivators piloting the airships soon saw the dismal state of the Dow River Court and couldn't help but gasp. Looking over at Bai Xiaochun with reverent gazes, they clasped hands. Greetings, Patriarch. Greetings, Elder Li. Their words confirmed what Li Qinghao had already suspected. Smile widening, he looked over at Bai Xiaochun, who shook his head and cleared his throat. Feeling a bit embarrassed, he waved his hand. All right, enough of that. Hurry up and clear all this rubble away. The Dow River Court got destroyed too quickly, and everyone ran away. They definitely left some treasures behind. Let's clean this place out. By this point, his heart was pounding as he thought back to all of the shakedowns he had performed in the past. However, all of those had been clan shakedowns. This was his first time overseeing a sect shakedown. In response to his words, the surrounding 1,000 disciples' eyes glittered. Without any pause, they began to clear away the rubble and search the Dow River Court for treasure. Li Qinghao's eyes shone with even deeper praise as he mused about how much this child had grown up. Even he himself had forgotten to loot the routed enemy. You're absolutely right, Xiaochun. The Dow River Court has years of reserves that will be of great help to the river-defying sect. However, even as the words left Li Qinghao's mouth, Bai Xiaochun frowned. Looking around at the river-defying sect disciples, he said, "You people don't know how to shake a place down. Aiya, look, there are more rocks over there than anywhere else. It only takes a single glance to tell that there's some treasure there. Clear that rubble. Look at this. Get over here, people. This boulder is obviously fluctuating with magical power. There's definitely some kind of valuable treasure buried under it. Aiya, look at you. What do you think you're doing? Pry up those floor tiles. They're obviously made from spirit stones." It was to Bai Xiaochun's great frustration that none of these people knew how to shake a place down. Bai Xiaochun was starting to get nervous. Therefore, he hurried up to the front lines. Considering that nobody knew what they were doing, he decided to take charge. Waving his hands and gesticulating wildly, he said, "No, don't dig there. Look at the ground. Who would put treasure there? Look at that oversized vase right next to you. Now that's a treasure. Look at all of you. Seriously. Come, let me tell you how to do it. You 300 go and clear out those boulders over there. And you 300 get rid of the rubble of that temple over there. Now, for you 300, well, you have an even more important mission. You head to that restricted area over there and take everything you can get your hands on. Know what it does? Take it. Don't know? Take it. The final 100 of you, come with me and just pick up whatever I tell you to. Oh, hey you. That's actually not made from spirit stones. It's just an ordinary floor tile." Considering the extensive experience he had shaking down clans in the wildlands, it didn't take long before he had the entire group of disciples sweeping over the sect like a hurricane, wiping everything away. Eventually, he couldn't help but sigh. "Listen to me everyone, when you're shaking a place down, you have to pay attention. Do you understand that? I mean, put some thought into it. If you were a sect patriarch, where would you hide all the treasure? Too complicated? Alright, I'll summarize. When you're shaking a place down, you have to remember 3 key words: fast, ruthless, precise. Those are my 3 words of wisdom I created to pass down as part of my legacy. Fast. You have to move quickly in everything you do. Have you people seen locusts before? When you shake a place down, you have to become like locusts. Ruthless. Well, that's simple. Your eyes need to be bloodshot, and you need to grab anything you see. Just imagine you're in a treasure shop where everything is free. The more you can grab, the more you'll profit. Our motto is, we take everything down to the grass and the roots. Finally, is precise. Like I said, you need to pay attention. To shake down amateurs who haven't learned how to pay attention, well, let me tell you the trick. You have to take everything you see even if you don't know what it is or whether it's valuable. Just wait until we get back. Then we can appraise everything properly. We just need to make sure we have everything to appraise to begin with." He spoke loudly, and his eyes danced up and down as he provided this crucial training. His words echoed about in the ruins of the Dow River Court, leaving the rest of the disciples temporarily dumbstruck and gasping inwardly. How can the patriarch be so good at shakedowns? This is my first time hearing the 3 words of wisdom of shakedowns. He's so familiar with shaking places down. Strange and even blank expressions could be seen on the faces of everyone present. No one had ever heard of someone making up 3 words to summarize how to perform a shakedown. Furthermore, it was obvious that such wisdom could only come from someone who had a huge amount of experience in such matters. That would be the only way to distill the action down into 3 words of wisdom. In fact, it was something only a professional could do. The disciples weren't the only ones to react in such a way. Li Qinghao stared with blank eyes as Bai Xiaochun scurried back and forth, giving direction and pointers everywhere he went. Thanks to his timely instruction, the disciples quickly excavated all of the treasures of the Dao River court. As it turned out, the 3 words of wisdom were truly powerful. Li Qinghao was both confused and also felt a bit of a headache coming on. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, he looked on helplessly with the realization that, no matter what cultivation base level Bai Xiaochun reached, there would always be something about him to worry about. He actually created a summary of how to shake places down. I guess, he just has a knack for it. Li Qinghao sighed, unsure of what to even say. One thing he didn't notice was how closely Bruiser was paying attention to everything. Years ago, it was the teachings of the black dog which had enabled Bruiser to attract so many female beasts to his side. And it was also from Bai Xiaochun that he had learned the ways of pride. All of a sudden, a new world seemed to be presented to him, causing his eyes to shine with veneration. In his opinion, this dad of his was simply too awesome. Who could have ever imagined that he had mastered a skill like this? After observing this special technique of shakedowns firsthand, Bruiser immediately realized that he had a new mission in life, and committed it to memory. It took about 2 hours for the disciples to wipe the Dao River court clean. By the end, their feelings for Bai Xiaochun had changed. Although they still felt deep awe and admiration, there was something else that they just couldn't put their finger on as well. Many of them suddenly recalled stories they had heard about things Bai Xiaochun had done years ago, stories that placed them right in the middle of laughter and tears. So, this is what Bai Xiaochun is like. Patriarch Bai. Whatever, I'll just keep calling him Bai Xiaochun. Although all of the disciples were muttering similar things, with Bai Xiaochun's instructions, they were enlightened regarding the 3 words of wisdom, and cleaned out the Dao River court until there wasn't even any grass left anywhere. They took most of the boulders, and the remains of most of the buildings. If the disciples of the Dao River court ever returned, they would surely be stunned, and would likely think they had taken a wrong turn somewhere. They would definitely not recognize their sect. Bruiser ended up helping out quite a bit. Not only was he a quick learner, he could change the size of his body at will, making it easy to get through tiny cracks to find special treasures. Bai Xiaochun sighed in admiration at how smart his son Bruiser was. Excellent, you've got real talent, Bruiser. From now on, our shakedown abilities are going to improve dramatically, all thanks to you. Bai Xiaochun's words of praise caused Bruiser to virtually glow with pride. However, as he watched, Bai Xiaochun actually felt a bit displeased. He really missed Zhou Yixing. Zhou Yixing could have dug out all of the treasures much more quickly. This isn't going to work, he thought. His expression suddenly turned serious. Yep, it seems I need give them some more training. Everyone in the sect needs to understand the quintessence of shakedowns. That way, the river-defying sect will have more wealth than ever. All disciples will have plenty of cultivation resources. It will be good tidings for everyone in the sect. Although it meant that things would be a bit more stressful, at least it gave him a new mission to work on. People started realizing that Bai Xiaochun had a thoughtful expression on his face, even Li Qinghao. Li Qinghao massaged the bridge of his nose again, a wry smile on his face as he realized that Bai Xiaochun must be coming up with some more plans. Finally, Li Qinghao cleared his throat. Alright, Xiaochun, let's get back home to the river-defying sect. Bai Xiaochun agreed, temporarily putting aside his previous thoughts. Waving his sleeve, he led Bruiser, the 1,000 disciples, and Li Qinghao through the air in a grand procession back to the river-defying sect. On the way back, Li Qinghao finally asked Bai Xiaochun about how the fighting had fared in the river-defying sect. It was with sparkling eyes that Bai Xiaochun went into vivid detail about the story. When Li Qinghao heard that Bai Xiaochun had fought 3 devas, and ended up killing one, crippling another, and sending another one fleeing, his heart trembled. Although he had guessed that things played out something like that, to hear the truth personally was still astonishing. After a bit of time spent chatting, they were closing in on the river-defying sect. Meanwhile, Patriarch Dao River had finally managed to sneak home in nascent divinity form. Actually, he had been waiting some distance away while everything happened in the sect. It wasn't until Bai Xiaochun actually left that he dared to actually go back into the emptied sect. There, he looked around in confusion, wondering if he was hallucinating. Is this really the Dao River Court? After staring around blankly for a while, a tremor ran through him, and he threw his head back and screamed, "You're pushing things too far, Bai Xiaochun." Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.